No mai, haere mai, piki mai, kaki mai, kia ora e and welcome to 30 with me, Guyon Espiner. We do 30 minutes with one guest and no cuts, so what we record is what you get. This is what our guest today wants to change. For 30 years, MMP has been dominated by one man, Winston Peters, who as king of the kingmakers has installed 2 Labour governments and 2 national ones. Opportunity Party leader Qiulae Wong wants to knock Winston Peters off his throne as kingmaker, saying if her party gets into Parliament, it would work with Labour or National on major policy reform. Now, they want a radical tax reset, which would introduce a land tax, which would then fund a universal basic income. The Opportunity Party also wants to ban seabed mining and to fund free public transport, to name just a few of their policies. But to get into Parliament, you need either 5% of the party vote or you need to win an electorate seat. The Opportunity Party, they've tried and failed 3 times. Qiulae Wong has only been leader since November 2025 and the election is in November of this year. Can she do it? Let's start the clock. 30 minutes with Qiulae Wong. Qiulae Wong, welcome to 30.
Kia ora, thanks for having me.
Can you knock Winston Peters off his throne as kingmaker?
I think we can provide a credible alternative for the parties to work with.
Yeah. And does that mean that you are positioning yourself as kingmaker?
Yeah, I mean, we've openly said we would work with either National or Labour, and I think what's important is we want to bring a sense of stability back to New Zealand politics. It really feels like we've ended up in this pendulum politics situation where we've got a left bloc and a right bloc, and we swing between them every 3 or 6 years. And instead of moving forward on our big issues, we just spend more time undoing each other's work and slapping a different name on a piece of policy and not really tackling the things like, our ageing population and superannuation.
Well, you talk about those 2 things, both of which Winston Peters has railed against. Do you see him as a handbrake?
Yeah.
Do you?
Yeah, that is one of the analogies we use, is that he has been a handbrake on progress, whereas we see ourselves as an accelerator to the future. And that's the role we would play in terms of keeping Labour and National accountable to that progress and moving forward.
He's a tough operator, isn't he?
He certainly is, and you've got to give him credit. He has done extraordinarily well for himself and for his party to be in government so many times, but then it raises the question, what has he really done for New Zealand when we're still really struggling with some of these big issues?
How would you answer that?
How would I answer what he's done for New Zealand? I think that he has played both the left and the right off of each other, and I don't think that's serving New Zealanders. I give him credit for things like the gold card and stuff that he has done for seniors, but there are a lot of young people that are really worried about their future in this country at the moment, and they're not sure what New Zealand is going to look like in 2050, and I can't see an inspiring vision coming from New Zealand First or any of the other parties for that matter.
All right, and we'll come back to that throughout the interview, but let's just start with who you are, because a lot of people will be seeing you probably for the first time. Tell us what sort of person you are, what your background is, roughly.
Yeah, I have spent 15 years working in the business sector in sustainability primarily. So I, from a very kind of early in my career, have seen the opportunity for business as a force for good. If we can harness the best of innovation and great ideas and competition to solve some of the world's biggest social and environmental problems, that's a really exciting place to be. So that's what's really driven me in terms of my career. As a person, I'm a mum, I've got 2 young kids, I grew up in Auckland, spent 9 years in London, and now I want to make New Zealand as awesome as of a place it can be if I'm going to live here for the rest of my life and raise my kids here.
What's your tribe? I mean, you're a social liberal, an atheist, someone who wants to decriminalise cannabis and other drugs. Is that you?
I am a young person. I suppose I'm a millennial, if you're going to class me, and I want to build a future that is full of innovation, that looks after people and the planet. And I don't think that's that complicated or hard, but I don't see anyone leading that future in New Zealand at the moment. And so that's why I've stepped into this role.
Would you describe yourself as a social liberal?
Yeah, I suppose you could if you want to put labels on it. I think we've steered clear of the left-right spectrum when it comes to political labels, because I don't think that that actually accurately represents where people sit these days. I think I am socially liberal on lots of issues. I think I'm probably more economically conservative than other people that might call themselves liberal. So yeah, I think we all have different facets of our personality.
Yeah, you followed a similar career trajectory to the Green Party's former co-leader, James Shaw. And in fact, I think you've said that he is someone that you can kind of align yourself with. Is that fair?
Yeah, I really respect what James did for the environmental movement in New Zealand, and and former Greens leaders as well before that. He had a way of being pragmatic, of bringing other people with him. Obviously, the Zero Carbon Act was the culmination of a lot of those efforts, bringing people, from both the left and the right together on that piece of legislation. And so I think it's a shame that it seems like they've lost a bit of that pragmatism in the Greens, and I think there's space for that.
What do you mean by that? Do you think they've gone too far into sort of social justice warrior sort of stuff, or?
Yeah, I think it's that, and also just the approach, even when it comes to environmental issues. I've been in that position. I've worked in sustainability my whole career. I've been the activist. I've been at the protests, and I've learned that doesn't always bring people on the journey with you. In some cases, it makes them kind of want to push back even further. And so I think that you have to approach these issues trying to understand what drives other people, and that's what I want to bring to this role.
I mean, isn't this Opportunity Party a left-wing party? The donors seem to think so. Philip Mills, who's major funder of Labour and the Greens, has given you $100,000 this year. I mean, and you said that you had sympathies towards some of the centre-right economics, but what are some policies of yours which are genuinely centre-right?
Well, we've had donations from people across the political spectrum, from both in the left and the right. So I would definitely counter that and say we've had support from both. Our tax policy, even though people call it a very left-wing policy, it has many of the same objectives of what traditional right-wing parties are trying to achieve. Tax breaks for working people, both at the lower income and potentially at higher income as well. Under our tax reset, if you are on a high income and you don't own property, you might get a tax cut. And so I think that could be really compelling for the right side of politics as well.
Okay, let's dive into that, because there is a lot in this policy. The land tax is one of your key policies that you've laid out already. So that's a 1.75 land tax on urban land, 0.5% on rural land. And so the idea is you raise about 28 billion and then you spend 24 billion on reforming tax benefits and paying out this universal income, or citizens' income, as you call it. So let's crack into the land tax. Why is this a good idea? Why are you promoting this?
So I think New Zealand has been widely critiqued for having a narrow tax base. Many economists have said that, the OECD has said that, and property is an obvious place that doesn't get taxed in New Zealand, and it's created this really unhealthy relationship and reliance on the property market to prop out our economy. It means that we don't have as much money flowing into businesses, shares, funds that might fund the infrastructure we need. And so I think it's a shift that we need to make as a country. We can't continue to rely on house prices increasing at the same rate that they have over the last couple of decades.
No, and indeed your land tax, by your own reckoning, would decrease property values by 10 or 15%. That's going to alarm some people watching this, isn't it?
It is challenging. And look, I'm one of those people. I bought a house in that COVID bubble. I don't particularly want to see equity in my home drop. But at the same time, I have 2 young kids and I want them to be able to afford to buy a house if they want to in the future. Okay,
but if the land values drop, so does your revenue base.
So
because if the land values drop 10 or 15%, well, suddenly you're not getting the tax on that land.
Well, we estimate that it will drop in the short term, but then as with all goods, it will rise again with inflation. So, land prices will continue to rise over time. There is a bit of an adjustment that needs to be made. Some of it is already starting to be made, which is good. House prices have come down a little bit, but we do need to see a bit more of a correction to bring back that value to income ratio, for example. It's currently at around 6 or 7 times income versus three or four what it was.
Is more affordable, isn't it? For sure. You're going to get some anomalies, though, in this. And the classic one is your 80-year-old who lives in Mount Eden, who's an elderly person, say, the land's worth $1 million. So you'd be asking them for, $17,500 a year, which they probably couldn't afford if they were living on super. So those sorts of things are going to be a challenge, aren't they?
Yeah, it is challenging. And again, when I was going through the policy, that example is my parents. They are now retired. They depend on super. They would have to be paying that land tax either out of their savings or they could defer it, which is part of our policy. So retirees would be able to defer that land tax until the property is sold or handed down.
But if you're 80 years old and you have to defer it, you do end up living for 15 more years. That would be $262,000 off the estate. Kids aren't really going to love that, are they?
So I think there's a couple of options for people in that situation. They could either downsize and look at how many years they might be looking to defer, or they. I think they can invest that money into shares and still be making a return on that money, and downsize their property at the same time. A lot of these people have invested and made $1 million or millions of dollars on the value of their property. And so I think it's fair to tax some of those gains. Okay.
It's also a 0.5% tax on rural land, which doesn't sound like much, but it's not uncommon to have $10 million value dairy farm in New Zealand. That would be higher than the average, but there'd be many of those. So you'd want $50,000 a year from them too, wouldn't you? The farmers, I don't know that they will be swinging from the rafters at that prospect.
So I think, with rural land, the thing to remember as well is that those people will also receive a citizen's income, and this applies to everyone over the age of 18. Obviously, with superannuitants, they're already receiving some of that support, but farmers would get the citizen's income, which would offset some of that $50,000. And often on farms, you'll have more than 2 people living on that property, so they could all contribute to that value. But the same problem exists in our rural land, that the land prices have risen more than what's affordable. And often now farmers are relying just on the capital gains from a property rather than the value of the business itself. And we don't think that that's a sustainable business model going forward. We want the businesses to be the most valuable part of the farm.
Okay, you talked about the citizens' income. Let's crack into that. So every citizen and resident, I believe, who's over 18 would get roughly $20,000 a year. What, tax-free?
Tax-free.
No forms?
No forms, just straight into the bank account. Yep.
To anyone? I mean, millionaires as well? I mean, does everyone get this, or is it means tested?
It's not means tested, so everyone gets it. With a millionaire, they're likely to own quite a lot of property and expensive property, so they will be paying a lot more in land tax. So they're not really going to be better off because they'll be paying out, potentially $100,000 or more.
Why give it to everyone though, even for people who don't need it?
Because of the simplicity of the system. And so the way that we've designed this as a package is that it's still a progressive system. So we're not giving away free money necessarily to those millionaires because they're paying their tax in other ways through property. But the simplicity of the system means that we could save potentially 2,000 jobs in MSD, repurpose those to something that's a bit more productive than sitting on a phone for 8 hours a day checking on, whether people have jumped through the right hoops or not.
Yeah, checking on their relationship status and how many nights they've stayed with their partner or whatever it is. I mean, because as I understand it, this universal basic income or citizens' income, it replaces all the benefits as well. You're going to strip all that out, are you, and replace it with that?
Yeah, so there are 5 benefits that it replaces, but there are still top-ups where people wouldn't be receiving any less than they receive now. So that's a commitment and a promise that we've made, is that through this system we're not reducing anyone's benefits.
But you're not increasing benefits either, are you?
Not at this stage, but benefits will increase over time with inflation and things like that. But yeah, so people would receive those top-ups, things like disability allowance, child support, those things will remain. And so there is still some checking of people's circumstances for that, but it's a lot more simplified than what we currently have at the moment.
Okay. In terms of tax, your policy material, when I read it, said that you would be offering an effective tax cut for the vast majority of New Zealanders. But the tax rates that you're proposing are actually significantly higher than they are now.
They are, and that's all part of the packaged up system. So this tax reset is implemented, it would all need to be implemented in full together. So you've got the citizens' income, the land tax, and then the change in the income tax brackets. That combined means that you're effectively not paying tax on the first $60,000 that you earn.
I see, because you're replacing the current rates with just three simple ones, aren't you? 28% for income up to 50,000,
yep.
34% on income between 50 and 200k,
yep.
and then for every dollar over 200,000, you'd be taxing at 39 cents in the dollar. So you're knocking out those lower rates. Can you guarantee that every low-income worker would be better off under your policy?
That's the modelling that we've shown. So when people receive that citizens' income, essentially $20,000 a year, then, as I said, up to $60,000, they're effectively paying no tax, which is a much better position than they are in now. And then that gradually, between that 60 and 200, as you said, depending on how much property they own. So if they don't own any property at all and continue to rent, then they'll be much better off. If they own property, someone like me who's on a median income and owns my own home will be about sort of net neutral in terms of what I pay in terms of tax at the moment. We don't want to punish those people or disincentivise home ownership completely. But yeah, it is, what we have calculated is that 70% of people would be better off, 20% would be about the same, and 10% of New Zealanders would be paying more.
Which 10% are paying more?
Mainly people that have really expensive property and are on high incomes.
Okay, to what extent is a citizen's income trying to future-proof against mass job displacement driven by AI?
That's a huge part of it as well. I think, a citizen's income, there's a lot of benefits for providing a safety net for people when they are, find themselves out of a job for longer than they would like, having to care for a sick or loved one who's become sick or, needs extra support. There's lots of these things that hit us in life, and at the moment our safety net isn't really designed to catch everybody that ends up there. And particularly with things like AI joblessness, we might be seeing unemployment rates of 10% and upwards in the near future. And I don't think our current welfare system is designed to cope with that.
No, but you could argue that 19,400, I think the figure is, that's not enough to live on, is it?
It's not enough.
It's tax-free though, isn't it, as I understand it?
Yeah, and it's not enough to live on. And that is also part of the point. We don't want people to just be sitting around doing nothing. We do want them to get out and work. If you compare it actually to our current welfare system, where your benefits get clawed back as soon as you go out and get some work, there's not really much incentive there, because you could just sit at home and earn the same amount as you would going out and working 5 to 10 hours a week.
Just circling back to AI, how big a revolution do you think it's going to be in terms of job displacement, job loss?
I think it's going to be pretty significant, and the fact that the OpenAI founder himself conducted a 3-year study of UBI in California shows that that they see that risk as real. And technology, we have learned over the years that it can be used for good or bad. And I think the important thing is to plan for it and to design the kind of future that we want to see. It might mean that people are being paid, going to work less, but then if we can have something like a citizen's income, which means they can use that time productively to contribute to their local community or volunteer at a local community garden, spend more time with their kids and teaching them how to play sport, that might be a great future that's worth aspiring to.
Do you think that human purpose and having, a search for meaning, do you think that that's going to be one of the challenges of AI?
I think that the human element is always going to be important and stay core to who we are as a society. And we're already seeing that. I think I've worked in, when I was at KPMG and even in my role now, we use AI tools, and it doesn't quite have that same level of creativity and intuition that we as humans have. So I think there's always going to be a role for us. But it's about being smart about that and designing our businesses, our organisations, our society in a way that harnesses the best of it.
Okay, let's crack into some more of your policy, and then I want to finish with the strategy element and the politics. You want compulsory super, right? And you want 12% contributions, 6% employer, 6% employee. So how quickly would you aim to phase something like that in?
So we've actually laid out a 10-year implementation plan as part of our tax reset. That's a starting point and open to discussion with other parties on that. But we do think it's important to phase it in alongside things like the land tax and the citizens' income as well. But we do need to get to a point where I think we have compulsory KiwiSaver. Because we want to make it affordable for the government to be able to support our older people, but also it's we've seen Australia and what it's done for their infrastructure, for the funds that are able to invest back into what that country needs to be more productive, and we've fallen behind on that. So the best time to start would have been 20 years ago. The next best time will be today.
Well, we did start in 1975, but someone cancelled it in 1976.
Yeah.
Are you talking about a system that you couldn't withdraw the money for first home deposits?
Yeah. And, I think there would always be some element of hardship withdrawals, but maybe some stricter criteria around that.
What is your view on the age of entitlement for super? Set at 65 at the moment. Previously, political parties have talked about graduating that out to 67. A lot of other countries are around that sort of mark. Is 65 unaffordable and too early? What's your view?
So our preference at the moment would be to means test it. I think
to means test super
rather than to change the age. Yeah, because I think when you increase the age, you've got different life expectancy rates of different groups of people.
Tough on labourers too, isn't it? People use their bodies for work.
Yeah.
Have you got a view roughly on where you would means test it?
Oh, we haven't set out those numbers and looked at what means testing would actually look like, but I think we would prefer that to raising the age.
Okay, public transport. I think you called recently for free public transport, and I think you had some metrics suggesting this might be $150 million or so. Why would that be a priority for large expenditure?
So one of the things that I was actually quite surprised to learn is that we already fund 9/10 of the cost of public transport. And if we could fund that last 10%, we would get so much more ridership and so much more benefit for our communities out of it. That makes it the $150 million actually seem like not that big of an investment to get a huge amount of gain. And I think if we're going to invest in a future where we have a low emissions, a good public transport system is part of our community that we want to design, that could make a huge difference to that for younger people, for low income people, and in terms of designing the sorts of cities that we want.
Okay, you've also talked about wanting to clean up politics. What are your priorities there?
So one of the big things here is around lobbying. So New Zealand has quite loose laws around lobbying.
Well, we don't have any, really.
Exactly. And so introducing things like a compulsory lobbying register, limiting the number of years before ministers can go into lobbying roles after they leave Parliament. At the moment, you can just walk straight out of the
so-called
beehive.
Revolving door. You can go either way.
Exactly.
In or out. Yeah.
Yes.
You'd want to crack down on that.
Yeah. And I think, having greater transparency around that, it sort of feels like at the moment we hear stories about lobbying and we sort of just accept that as normal politics in New Zealand.
What examples worry you?
Well, I think commercial fishing is a big one. I think, it's no secret that New Zealand First is largely supported by a lot of the big commercial fishing companies. And we've seen that in the legislation, that's favoured those commercial interests over recreational fishers and conservation. And, whether or not it is that black and white, whether or not, it's a little bit more grey.
Do you sense an erosion in some of those standards of an integrity in New Zealand democracy and politics?
Yeah, I do. And I think it's sadly leading to a lot of loss of trust from the New Zealand public in our politics. Most people now are just tuning out because they don't think that either their vote doesn't make a difference or, that whether they vote left or right, we're just going to get more of the same. And that's a really dangerous place, I think, for our democracy to go.
And that's the void that you are shouting into now, isn't it? You have to somehow get people to actually resonate with what you're saying. The party's tried 3 times and failed. What's different this time? How are you going to make it over that 5% threshold? You need what's that, 120,000 votes or something, is it?
About 120, 130. Okay. I'm saying 150 just to be safe. So
you've got to sell out Eden Park 3 times.
Yeah.
Coldplay did it, but how are you going to do it?
Yeah, I think that we are a very different party. We've learnt a lot over the 3 elections that we've run in, and I think our strategy is working. We're seeing better polling, better membership numbers, better donations than we've ever had before, and I think that's a result of us getting out into the community and having those conversations with everyday New Zealanders. We have to earn their trust. Not just expect that them reading our policy manifesto is going to be enough for them to vote on. They need to believe that we are going to be good advocates for them in Parliament. And that takes time and us getting out and talking to people.
Okay, some of the policy areas that we've discussed today, they're highly interesting. They're pretty radical in terms of reset. You'd have almost no chance of getting a lot of that through as a minor party, would you? Let's say you creep over the 5% threshold, which would be an amazing result for you, and you had 6, 7, 8 MPs at tops. Yeah. You're not going to be able to reset the tax system, are you? So what are the key things that you would, we call them bottom lines at times, but pick your own phrase. But what would you want to be going into those coalition negotiations with either Labour or National? What are the big things for you that you would realistically get over the line?
Yeah, I think we're not naive to think that we, as a new party entering Parliament for the first time, will be able to do tax reform overnight. I think we've acknowledged that. We would like a seat at the table to explore something like this further and bring other parties in on the conversation and explore that. And things that I think we could get across the line to actually enact would be around energy. That's a policy priority for us.
Such as?
So our energy policy talks about a capacity investment scheme to incentivise more generation and abundant renewable energy.
That's right. Don't you want to triple the amount of renewables?
Triple the amount of renewable energy, accelerate electrification, get on with it, build a long-term energy strategy. I think that that's something both Labour and National will want to do, particularly now given the fuel crisis. I think there's stuff around the oceans there where we would like to claw back some of that preference for the commercial industry and set up a sustainable fishing industry for the future. And I think there's stuff around the cleaning up politics, bringing democracy back, whether that's citizens' assemblies, stronger lobbying laws. We'd like to see something like that in a coalition agreement.
Okay, so they're possibly 3 of your higher priorities anyway.
Yeah, and we're clear on, if people go to our policy page on our website, we've got 5 top priorities there. Those are the things we're mainly focusing on this year.
And you talked about having a seat at the table. Would that mean the cabinet table? I mean, are you going into this with the hope of being a cabinet minister?
Possibly. Depends who the other partners are, what their focus is. I mean, if I guess you look at Labour, for example, they've already talked about a capital gains tax. So, we might be able to work with them on something around revenue or finance. Whether it's National, I think we would want to be pushing harder on the environment and maybe taking some of the portfolios where we can hold them accountable on environmental issues. So yeah, it depends on the partner. And we also recognise that we're new to Parliament and we've got lots to learn. But I think we've got some really talented people that would make excellent MPs.
So it is really about replacing New Zealand First for you, isn't it? Because you were saying you could work, with National Act, with the opportunities, or you could work with Labour and the Greens. You don't have a preference. You could work with either.
We don't have a preference, and I think that's an important line to maintain and to hold, because that's what creates the stability and stops that pendulum from swinging so far from the left and the right. I think what New Zealand First has done is actually accentuate that pendulum over the last couple of decades, whereas we want to keep it as little as possible in terms of swinging from left to right, because that's what I hear from businesses, teachers, doctors. They're sick of being pulled in multiple different directions. They just want a steady path forward.
Okay, you talked about breaching the 5% threshold. The other way to get into Parliament is to win an electorate seat. You're standing in Mount Albert. Have you sought, or would you seek, an electoral accommodation? In other words, asking one of the parties to stand aside so that you can win, and that way you wouldn't need to win the 5%?
Well, I think as we've just discussed, we have to maintain that neutral position really strongly. So we wouldn't be making any deals. We won't be making any deals. If they want to stand candidates down and make way for us, that's great. But there'll be no quid pro quo from our side.
Have you had any of those discussions with either of the parties?
No, we haven't. I've met with them at events and things. We've had some nice chats, but no strategy discussions.
Was Winston Peters among those leaders you talked to?
I haven't actually spoken to him directly, but I've been on a few panels with Shane Jones and and we've got along fine.
And how do you see the big two major parties? You'd be working with one of them as Prime Minister if you were to get in.
Yeah.
Do you rate Chris Luxon?
I think for both the Chris's, what they are really lacking is that long-term vision for New Zealand. And I think regardless of who it is, that's what we are going to be pushing them hard on, is what is the New Zealand we want to create by 2050 and how we're not going to stop our young people from leaving by anything we can really do to change their lives.
You spent 10 years in London, I think.
Yeah. And, we're not going to change their lives overnight, but we can tell them the kind of country that we want to build so that they'll either come back, in 5-10 years, or maybe they'll delay going overseas because they think that that's a country worth working towards. I think that that's what's really missing with both Labour and National.
Is this a one-shot wonder for you? If you don't make it, are you out and back to sustainability work or whatever?
No, to be honest, I came into this, saying I'd give it a year and see how it goes and maybe I'll go back. But now that I've done 7 months in the role, I can't see myself leaving, even if we don't quite make the 5%. So I'd hopefully stick around if I can, if the party will keep me.
How do you rate your chances? If 10 was certainty and 0 was no chance, how do you rate your chances of getting in?
I mean, after we had a good poll yesterday, I'm sitting at about a 7.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's see how it goes. Thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate your time and thanks for coming into the studio.
Thank you.
That was 30 minutes with Qiulae Wong. This is 30 with me, Guyon Espiner. We'll catch you next time.